So, to summarize Moby Dick for you,
whereas we have already seen that the tape measure gives 72 feet for the skeleton of a large-sized modern whale. And I have heard on Whaleman's authority that sperm whales have been captured near 100 feet long at the time of capture.
the sperm whale, among the English of old vaguely unknown as the trumpa whale, and the five-setter whale, and the anvil-headed whale, is the present cacalote of the French.
And the five-setter whale and the anvil-headed whale is the present cacalote of the French.
And potsfish of the Germans, and macrophil...
I know of only 4 published outlines of the great sperm whale: Colnett's, Huggins, Frederick Cuvier's, and Beale's. In the previous chapter, Colnett and Cuvier have been referred to. Huggins is far better than theirs, but by great odds Beale's is the best. All Beale's drawings of his whale.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'll be reviewing a book that I finished a few days ago, and a book that took me 3 months to read. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This edition that I have here also doesn't have a dust jacket. I don't know if it once had a dust jacket and it fell off, or if it's not even meant to have a dust jacket or something, but this is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Moby Dick is about a young sailor named Ishmael who wants to set out on a whaling voyage under Captain Ahab. But there is one man on the voyage named Fedallah, who warns Ishmael not to join the crew on this ship, which is called the Pequod. Fedallah warns Ishmael that there is a danger coming for the Pequod. But Ishmael goes on the ship anyway, becomes part of the crew, goes out on a whaling voyage, along with his friend Queequeg, who is a former cannibal who escaped from his island. Basically, we follow the ship named the Pequod and its crew as they endeavor to hunt down the monstrous whale known as Moby Dick. This whale, Moby Dick, once bit off the leg of Captain Ahab, who happens to be captain of the Pequod, and Ahab is searching out for revenge against this whale. Captain Ahab nails a single coin into the mast of the ship and says that whoever can kill Moby Dick will get the coin. So basically, this is the story about a captain going out for revenge against the whale that took his leg. So this story starts out very gripping. I was instantly hooked right from the very beginning. From the very beginning, I was loving this book. And then, after the first 200 pages, there's millions of tangents about whaling. And literally for the next 300 pages, I even counted, it's almost 300 pages. They're just facts about whales, whale biology, the whaling industry, all this other random stuff about whales. And I know that many people are very annoyed by that in this book, and they will set this book down just because of that and never finish it. But I actually love the whaling tangents. I found a lot of them to be very fascinating, and they did add to my enjoyment of this book. Even though I probably would have preferred it if all the whaling tangents had been cut out of the book, and it had just included the story inside, I probably would have preferred it that way, but I still found all the tangents about whales to just be very fascinating. I enjoyed that aspect of this book immensely, even though it wasn't really a necessary part of the book. I just found all the facts about whales to be fascinating. I loved all the tangents in this book, and I was kind of thinking, when I finished this book and looking back on it, thinking back on my experience with it, all the tangents about whales, the 300 pages that are just about whale biology, whaling industry, what are the most accurate paintings and books about whales. I think that all of this whaling stuff represents Ishmael, who's the main character. It represents Ishmael's journey as he joins the ship's crew and learns more about whales and the way of whaling. And you can definitely picture Ishmael learning about all these things and being fascinated by them and thinking about them and writing them down in his journal. So I actually thoroughly enjoyed the whaling tangents, and even though they weren't necessarily a part of the story, I think they represent Ishmael's journey as he steadily learns more about whales and gets to gain an appreciation for the honor and glory of whaling. But after the 200 or 250 pages of tangents, I just started getting really, really tired of them, because he rambles on and on and on for pages and pages. And I can hardly remember any of the stuff that I read in there. I mean, I can remember a lot of the whaling tangents, but I can probably only remember less than 50% of it, maybe 30%, 40% of all that this book had to say about whales and whaling biology and all that. It rambles on for pages and pages and pages and pages about what kind of starts to feel like nothing after a while. And I started to get really bored, my mind would wander from what I was reading. The next thing I knew, 15 minutes had gone by and I had only read like 2.5 pages. So after the first 200 pages of all the whaling tangents, I got really tired of it. And I suddenly felt the amount of pages that I had read, and it felt so exhausting and wearisome. And I almost did not want to finish it, but I was very near to the end. After the next 50 pages or so that's about 300 pages of facts about whales,
Whale biology, whaling, the glory and honor of whaling, which paintings of whales are the most accurate, the exact measurement of the whales, including their skeletons, how many whales a year are killed, every single thing we need to know about the biology of a whale.
After all of this, it hops right back into the story for the last 150 pages or so. So, the first half of this book, really, really good. And then the middle part, not quite as good. Fascinating, but got really bored of it after a while. And then the final bit of this book was so, so good. I am so glad that I stuck with this book all the way through the end, because the end really made up for how exhausted I got with how it rambled on and on about whales. The ending was amazing. And I know this book could probably be summarized in just a couple of sentences. Not a lot actually happened in the context of the story. It's just Ishmael finds this cannibal called Queequeg, becomes friends with him. They go off on a ship. Captain Ahab says he'll give a golden coin to anyone who can kill Moby Dick, which is a whale that took his leg off. And they sail on the seas. They kill a couple whales. They meet a couple other cargo ships, whaling ships, and ask them for news about Moby Dick. And eventually they find Moby Dick, and I'm not going to go into the rest because that's spoilers. So this was a very, very slow book. Looking back, I think this is a book that is meant to be slowly soaked in and slowly savored over lots of time. It's not like a really, really fast-paced book that you can breeze through in a day or two. It is a very slow-paced book, and you're kind of meant to take your time with it and slowly savor it, which is what I did. This is a long and difficult journey reading this book, but definitely a worthwhile one. Another thing that I loved about this book was all the dialogue. The dialogue, I think, was the strongest part of this book. The things that these characters said, every single sentence that they spoke, was so impactful, and there was some sort of deeper meaning behind it, even if I didn't immediately grasp it. Especially the dialogue between Captain Ahab and his crew when he's talking about going out for revenge on Moby Dick, and then all the crew are saying that this is much too hard of a journey. We've been chasing Moby Dick for months now. It's a wild goose chase and we can't do it. And just the dialogue and the debates between all these characters was so good. There were a couple chapters where it was just straight dialogue, no prose at all, and I really enjoyed those chapters as well. The dialogue, I think, was one of the strongest parts of this book. Another thing I noticed is that all the names in this book are intentionally given. So I'll just bring up one example. You've got Captain Ahab, who is very similar to the Ahab in the Bible, overcome by greed and thirsty for revenge. And then there's the Rachel, which is a ship that represents the Rachel from the Bible. And then Ishmael, of course, I'm not going to go into all of that. But all of these names, you can tell, were intentionally chosen by the author. At the beginning of the book, Ishmael, the main character, is front and center of the story. He is what drives the story forward. He is what the story is about. But then, as you get to the halfway point of the book, Ishmael slowly starts to fade. And from the midway point of the book, Ishmael is literally never mentioned again. The story is never seen from his perspective again, except until the last chapter. He's literally never mentioned again until the last chapter. And you can kind of see how Ishmael kind of kicks the story off in a way. He starts the story, and at first the story is about him, but then it slowly starts to become more about whales and about Captain Ahab's thirst for revenge and about the dynamics and debates between different members of the crew like Stubb and Flask. I didn't realize it at first, but then I didn't realize at first that Ishmael had basically almost faded from the story. Even though he was still part of the crew, he was still in every scene, he just wasn't mentioned at all. And I didn't realize it at first, but then eventually I realized it, and it was kind of weird. Because initially, Ishmael is what drives the story on. Ishmael is the main character. Then the story moves away from him and moves on to Captain Ahab, Stubb and Flask, and other members of the crew. Really interesting. I don't know if this is like, and this isn't like a bad thing or a good thing about the book. I didn't mind that Ishmael slowly disappeared from the story until the very last chapter. It's just something really interesting that I noticed. It's not something bad or good about the book, just interesting. And Ishmael only returns at the very end of the last chapter. I kind of imagine at the beginning how Ishmael is what the story is about, but then he joins the crew. And I kind of imagine that all the whaling tangents is what Ishmael is doing. Like, while Stubb and Flask are debating, while Captain Ahab is ranting on and on about Moby Dick and whales, and Ishmael is just sitting in the corner of the book, writing down in his diary all these interesting facts about whales that he's learning. And that's like why he's absent from a lot of the story from the halfway point and onwards. Like that wasn't mentioned in this book or anything, but that's just kind of how I imagined it. So in the end, this is a very difficult and challenging read, and it's definitely not for everyone. But it is a worthwhile read. It is so worth it for the ending. It's a book that's meant to be slowly savored and soaked in over a long amount of time, which is what I did. And I can safely say that I thoroughly enjoyed it, even though there were a lot of whaling tangents. I did like most of the whaling tangents. They began to grow very wearisome on me after a while. So the dialogue in this book, absolutely incredible. And overall, looking back, there were lots of high moments of this book and lots of low points. But overall, it's a 10 out of 10 read for me. It is a long journey that is well worth it, and a very impactful ending. 10 out of 10. This book was incredible, amazing, and I loved every bit of it. I highly recommend it. You're going to have a long attention span for this one as well, and a lot of patience. But it's a journey, and a journey that is well worth it. 10 out of 10. Fantastic book. Amazing, incredible, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Also learned a lot about whales in the process. Well, that was my review for Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and for now, farewell.